Money FM 89.3. Best of breakfast. The U.S. Market Update with Money FM 89.3.
Good morning. Welcome to the U.S. Markets Wrap. And we've got another good day in the markets. Stocks in the green, the S&P 500 hitting a fresh all-time high. Technology shares such as Oracle and Nvidia rallied on artificial intelligence optimism, as well as President Donald Trump's new term in office. So the S&P 500 up 0.6%. The Nasdaq Composite popped 1.3%, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average squeezing out a gain of 0.3%. For more insights, we are joined by Brenda Vingiello. She is the Chief Investment Officer at Sandhill Global Advisors. Brenda, good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning. Thank you. I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you as well, Brenda. Let's talk about how the new year is shaping up for markets so far. And looking at what Donald Trump has announced, it's a lot of stuff, including a big investment into AI. So a $500 billion push called Stargate. It will involve Open AI, SoftBank, as well as Oracle. What do you take away from this move as what investors should be looking out for?
Well, I think there's been a lot of speculation just about what Trump's priorities would be when he finally took off. On the campaign trail, there was a lot of talk about some things that were of concern for investors, mainly tariffs, foreign relations, and also immigration policy. There's been a lot of concern that those would be negatives for the economy. But I think early in his term here, very early, that we're going to likely hear more and more coming out of Washington. But the fact that he's announced these projects, like the $500 billion project in AI, suggests that he is really focused on growth in the U.S. and being supportive, particularly of the technology industry. And that is, when you think about the United States, it is really one of the core competencies of the U.S. And so he seems to certainly be embracing that. And a lot of the senior level management at many of these companies is also really much more involved, it seems, in politics in Washington than they ever have been in the past. Whether you believe that AI is really going to be as transformative as hoped or not, this year is definitely bound to be another year of significant investments. And it's not just coming from this project that was announced by Donald Trump. Individual companies like Microsoft have announced they're also spending billions this year. Microsoft alone is spending $80 billion this year on AI. And that really is filtering through many parts of the U.S. economy. So it's not just dollars being spent on chips from NVIDIA. It's really investments in data centers and power, and that all impacts things like real estate, construction, servers, utilities. So it's a broad range of industries that really benefit, which is an overall positive for the U.S. economy in terms of the stimulus that it should provide.
Yeah, Brenda, I suppose not a big surprise seeing the lineup of tech leaders at his inauguration. So is there a big signal for investors to just get more exposure into tech in the coming year?
Well, I do think if we look at the mega cap tech stocks, right, so those are the ones that really make up the top 10 holdings within the S&P 500. The valuation there is expensive relative to history and is willing to pay a high valuation multiple for. But now many of these companies are becoming asset heavy because they are spending so much, billions and billions, on AI infrastructure. So I do think there is some risk that with that group in particular, we might see some valuation multiple contraction. I still think that the fundamentals are going to be positive. But what I think, too, is that investors are likely to look outside of mega cap tech for other areas that are going to be beneficiaries of this spending. Because, as I mentioned earlier, it should really filter through a lot of different parts of the economy. And many of the parts of the stock market are much more attractively valued, and there is opportunity there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, talking about value, let's talk about what else is catching your eye in the markets, because we've got earnings season underway. We've got the banks reporting largely positive numbers. I guess a bit of M&A optimism happening there. What else is catching your eye? What sort of commentary has caught your eye in terms of how it is reflecting the U.S. economy?
Yeah, well, it's still really early in earnings season, but I'll say even from the earnings we've seen thus far, mostly from financials and banks, there is certainly optimism there about less regulation, how that would be a positive for that sector in particular. But even taking that optimism out of the picture, bank earnings are really strong. So good fundamentals there. That's a group that really had not acted particularly well until the election, when hopes of deregulation really started to positively impact that sector. I do think as we look to this year, areas like small and mid-cap stocks, which I know I've talked about on your show before, but that's an area where earnings growth is really projected to be pretty significant in 2025, following what was 2 years, basically, of an earnings recession for small-cap stocks. So really, there's a pretty significant turnaround projected there. And that's an area where valuation is attractive. Also, those companies are more domestically focused. So if the U.S. economy continues to be healthy, as we expect it will be, those companies should benefit. They also will benefit if there is deregulation and also from lower corporate taxes. If that also ultimately ends up being passed, those companies would be outsized beneficiaries. But at the individual stock level, I think you can even look in other areas of tech, areas like a company like Snowflake. This is one of the recent additions in the portfolio, which really provides warehousing, which I think is something that's going to be necessary as more and more data moves to the cloud. More and more data needs to be used for AI purposes. I think that companies like Snowflake are going to be very important. The other company in that space is private, the large company Databricks. We may see that company go public this year, but for now, Snowflake is really the primary way that you can gain exposure in the public market. A company like Eaton also is interesting. Eaton is an industrial company that really provides a lot of electrical components and pieces, and there's going to be a lot of investment having to go into sourcing power and a lot of electrification happening. And so that's another company that we think is going to be a beneficiary, but isn't within that core group of the mega cap 8 stocks that have driven so much of the performance that we've seen in the market over the last couple of years.
Yeah, Brenda, from a commentary, I've also seen how some of these companies are a bit worried about the policies in terms of potential tariffs that might be implemented. How do you approach this in the coming year in terms of factoring that into your investment approach?
Sure. Well, I think that we don't know exactly how things are going to play out, but I do think that this administration likely wants to leave a legacy of having continued to promote economic growth in the United States. So I would be very surprised if really onerous tariffs were imposed that ultimately ended up hurting companies in the U.S. and consumers in the U.S. So I do think we'll likely see something that's a little bit more thoughtful in terms of tariffs. But we've seen this before with President Trump. He loves to threaten and use something like tariffs as negotiated. So I do think this time around it's going to be no different, but it will leave investors questioning for a while until we really know exactly how these policies are going to be implemented.
All right, one to watch if these tariffs will be as aggressive as he has threatened. We've been in conversation with Brenda Vingiello. She is the Chief Investment Officer for Sand Hill Global Advisors. Brenda, thanks for your time and insights. Great chatting with you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks again. Stay with Money FM 89.3.
Before acting on the information on Money FM, please consider if it's suitable for your own investment objectives, financial situation, and risk tolerance. To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.